Vathari Dominion's arrival in the Sol system was not marked by the sound of warnings or the cry of alarm. It was silent, like the death of a star in the void. Their dreadnought-class warships, massive monolithic structures that seemed more like cosmic cathedrals than ships of war, appeared in the outer reaches of the system with little fanfare, eclipsing Mars and dwarfing the human fleet that had long thought itself untouchable. The Dominion had come to strip-mine Mars. They had come for its resources, its rare metals, and its ice. The Crixel Collective might have wiped out humanity's outer colonies in a brutal wave, but the Vathari were far more insidious. They didn't need to raise cities or burn worlds to prove their power. They simply took what they needed and left nothing behind. Mars, the cradle of humanity's first colonization, was no exception. The human forces stationed on the Red Planet, scattered in outposts and defensive rings, could do nothing as the dreadnought-class warships dropped into position. The ships were protected by gravity shields so advanced that conventional weapons were useless against them. Earth's fleet had no answer for the Vathari's firepower. No missile, no railgun, no ion cannon could penetrate the dreadnought's defenses. The first signs of conflict were subtle, almost clinical. The Vathari's mining ships, once hidden deep in the gravity well of Mars's atmosphere, began to churn with unnatural energy. Their colossal harvesting machines, capable of dismantling entire planetary crusts in a matter of hours, became active. They were not just mining, they were stripping Mars bare, reducing mountains into plains of rubble. But as they began their work, a curious anomaly appeared. The gravitational pull on Mars, usually stable, began to fluctuate. The gigantic dreadnoughts used gravity tethers to hold themselves in position, controlling their massive mass with precision. But, as the mining operations intensified, there were periodic bursts, small bursts of electromagnetic interference that lasted a fraction of a second, during which the gravity shields flickered. Just a brief moment. But it was enough to catch the attention of Commander Jareth Vosk, the disgraced former officer who had been cast aside after speaking out against Earth's failure to properly prepare for the Vathari threat. Vosk had always been a student of systems. He had studied the enemy for years and had always known something was off. His career, once filled with promise, had soured after his warning to Earth Command fell on deaf ears. The Dominion's brutal tactics, their complete disregard for peaceful negotiation, was beyond the scope of any human defense plans. Despite Earth's best attempts to bolster defenses, their best weapons were useless. The Vathari were simply too strong. But now, with Mars under assault, Vosk had an opportunity to correct his mistakes, to uncover the flaw that Earth Command had overlooked. While others scrambled to respond to the Vathari's brutality, Vosk set to work. In the quiet corners of the abandoned research facility that had once served as the center of Earth's intelligence efforts, he pieced together everything he knew. The flaw was clear, and yet it had been ignored by the Dominion's engineers. As the massive dreadnoughts used their gravity shields to perform the complex task of planetary mining, they required more power than the ships could maintain without sacrificing shield integrity. The mining process, which involved shifting immense amounts of mass within the planet's crust, demanded that the ships divert some of their energy away from the gravity shields. The shields would fluctuate for a split second, barely perceptible, but it was there. Vosk wasn't the only one who noticed it, though. The war had already begun, and despite his demotion, he had a knack for seeing patterns that others missed. He spent hours at the data terminals, reviewing sensor reports and pulling together every scrap of information he could find. The more he worked, the more the pieces fell into place. There was a weakness in their shields, one that could be exploited. But only with the right weapon. He needed something that could penetrate the gravity shields and target the vessels while they were vulnerable. The question was, how? The solution came in a flash of memory. Years earlier, Earth had launched a failed project. A project deemed too dangerous, too unstable to deploy. The Starbreaker project. The Starbreaker had been an experimental weapon designed to harness the destructive power of solar plasma. It was a harrowing piece of technology, capable of releasing plasma at temperatures that could melt through anything, including the most advanced materials. But there had been one significant flaw. One reason the project was abandoned. The weapon destabilized after about 90 seconds of use, and anything designed to contain the plasma burst inevitably collapsed. No one had believed it could be fixed in time to be of any practical use, so it was scrapped. Vosk saw something others didn't. The Starbreaker wasn't a failure. It had the potential to be the weapon that could turn the tide of this war. The problem wasn't the weapon itself, but how it had been designed and stored. If he could modify the weapon, adjust its energy flux, maybe, just maybe, it could be fired at a key moment to penetrate the Veithari ship's shields. The gravity shields had a weakness, and the Starbreaker could be the key to exploiting it. Vosk's plan was simple but incredibly risky. If he could steal the schematics of the Starbreaker, he could retro-engineer a prototype, use it against the Veithari, and break through their shields during a critical moment. But there was one problem. The schematics were not readily available, and the technology had been discarded. His only hope now lay in Earth's resistance forces on Mars, who had managed to infiltrate some of the Veithari installations. They had been stealing Dominion tech for months, picking apart whatever they could salvage from the wreckage of human colonies and Veithari fleets. Vosk knew they could help him. He just had to convince them that they were fighting for something bigger than survival. As Vosk stood at the command console, staring at the data, he knew the odds were stacked against him. But he also knew one thing. If they didn't strike back now, humanity might never have a chance. The Veithari Dominion had just unleashed hell on Mars, and Earth had no choice but to fight back. His mission was clear. He would find the Starbreaker schematics, reverse engineer them, and use it to breach the Veithari's impenetrable defenses. This was humanity's chance to prove its worth. The odds were slim, but Commander Jareth Vosk wasn't one to back down from a fight. And so, the plan began to take shape. The tension in Vosk's chest had become unbearable as he paced in front of the makeshift command center. The control room, situated deep beneath the Martian surface, was a hodgepodge of salvaged equipment and outdated consoles, patched together by the ingenuity of the local resistance. Every inch of the room hummed with quiet urgency, the air thick with the kind of anticipation that only existed when a life-and-death mission loomed on the horizon. Commander Jareth Vosk had spent years fighting bureaucracy, dodging orders from the very people who should have been backing him up, and now here he was, staring down a task far more dangerous than anything the Dominion had thrown at him so far. "Are we clear to proceed?" Vosk asked, his voice steady, but laced with the quiet frustration of a man who had seen too many resources wasted on politics instead of actual defense. The voice crackled through the comms. "Yes, Commander. The Martian resistance is ready. The depot is locked down, but it's still a risk. There are Dominion sensors in the vicinity." Vosk knew the depot in question had once been a critical hub for Earth's military supply lines. It had been abandoned after the initial attack on the colonies, left to rot under layers of dust. But the depot's true value had never been the weapons or the old artillery. It was the Starbreaker prototypes, hidden deep within its vaults. Tactical weapons that had been designed but never deployed. These were the weapons Vosk needed to tip the scales in humanity's favor. "Then we move fast," Vosk replied, turning to the team of engineers and resistance fighters gathered around the holomap. "The Starbreaker is humanity's only chance. We can't afford to fail." The Martian resistance, a motley crew of ex-colonists, engineers and defectors, had joined Vosk's mission out of necessity. After the massacre at Fort Dagger, their trust in the Federation had crumbled. Earth's distant bureaucrats had abandoned the frontier worlds, and now it was up to those who had been left behind to pick up the pieces. Vosk had made the decision to bring them on board, using their intimate knowledge of Martian terrain and their ability to procure equipment from old abandoned stations. They set off under the cover of darkness, crossing the rust-colored dunes of Mars in heavily armored transports, their cloaking technology flickering faintly in the low Martian atmosphere. Once they reached the depot, they wasted no time. Vosk led the way, his eyes scanning every shadow as they infiltrated the compound, bypassing security systems and breaking through reinforced doors. They had no time to waste. Vosk, along with his team, made their way to the vault where the Starbreaker prototypes were kept. The first prototype was massive, almost too large to move, but they had carefully planned every detail. It was the size of a small shuttle and designed to carry enough plasma energy to penetrate even the most advanced shields. The only problem was that the technology was unstable, as Vosk had feared. It had a 90-second activation time before it would destabilize, a factor that had kept the weapons from being used in combat. But for Vosk, that was precisely what made it the perfect weapon to use against the Dreadnought-class warships. The plan was simple. Launch the prototype into a coronal mass ejection, using the immense solar energy to stabilize it just long enough for it to hit its target. The result would be a plasma strike so powerful that it could breach the Dreadnought's gravity shields, a shield that normally repelled anything short of a direct hit from a planet-killer weapon. They had no time to perfect it. They had no time for anything but the immediate execution of their plan. "On your mark," Vosk instructed as the team placed the Starbreaker prototype into the launch chamber. The engineers worked swiftly, their hands moving in perfect coordination, making last-minute adjustments to the weapon's systems. Vosk kept his eyes on the countdown clock. They were moving fast, but the minutes were slipping away. He had no illusions about how dangerous this was. A failure here would mean the end of the human colonies and the beginning of a full-scale Vathari occupation. There was no room for error. "Launch!" Vosk commanded. With a violent hum, the prototype fired into the sky, its trajectory aimed directly at the solar mass ejection that was steadily building in the upper layers of Mars's atmosphere. The timing was everything. The weapon would take minutes to align, but the real test would be in the last seconds, when the plasma field had to stabilize long enough for it to hit the heart of the Dreadnought. Vosk held his breath. Moments later, the weapon reached the mass ejection. They saw it launch into the heart of the eruption, enveloped in a blinding blue light, and then disappear into the swirling corona. His fingers drummed nervously on the console as the plasma torpedo sped towards its target, the Dominion's Dreadnought. "Impact!" came the voice of one of the Resistance fighters, his voice tinged with disbelief. The impact sent shockwaves through the system. The Dreadnought-class warship shook violently, and the comms channel erupted with frantic calls. The hit was successful, but the Starbreaker detonated prematurely. The ship was crippled, but not destroyed. The Vathari had been given a glimpse of their vulnerability, but they were still formidable opponents. "Get the ship moving! We need to leave now!" Vosk barked, but the Dominion was quick to respond. Hunter-killer drones launched from the nearby fleet, hurtling through space with deadly precision, their sleek forms designed to hunt down targets with lightning speed. Vosk's team scrambled to retreat, but as they moved to their escape route, it was clear that they had underestimated the Dominion's retaliation. The drones were fast, relentless, and unforgiving. "We're being pursued," Kell reported, his voice tight with concern. "Deploy decoy buoys," Vosk ordered, his voice steady. He had prepared for this. The Resistance had secured trade routes with Belter miners, who had helped them develop decoy systems using radiation coils. The coils emitted signatures that mimicked the escape trajectory of human ships, fooling the Dominion into believing they were chasing a different target. It worked, but not without cost. The buoys were imperfect, and 3 of their ships were lost as the plasma coils ruptured under pressure. Vosk gritted his teeth as he watched the wreckage of their ships spin off into the dark vacuum of space. "A port," Vosk said, his voice strained but firm. "We've lost 3 ships, Commander," Kell responded. "But the decoys worked. They're pulling back." Vosk sighed in relief, but the victory was bittersweet. 1 dreadnought had been crippled, but it was still operational. The Dominion would be back, but so would Vosk. The blockade had come swiftly and decisively. The Vathari Dominion, having taken heavy losses from the first attack on their dreadnoughts, retaliated with a force that dwarfed anything humanity had mustered in response. Earth, which had just begun to feel the warmth of hope after the success of their first strike, was suddenly staring down the barrel of a much larger, much more dangerous enemy. Admiral Jareth Vosk stood in the dimly lit war room, staring out at the holographic display of Earth and its neighboring planets. A single line of ships, larger than any that had come before, circled Earth, a blockade that threatened to starve the human colonies of vital supplies. The Vathari had learned from their first defeat, and now they were not going to take any chances. They had mobilized their fleet not just to destroy Earth's remaining forces, but to punish them, to break their will. "Voske, we cannot keep this up. There's no way we can break their blockade. We'll be completely cut off," said Kell, the chief engineer who had become one of Vosk's most trusted allies since the battle at Hephaestus Station. Vosk was silent for a moment, staring at the projection of the blockade. The Vathari had made their point, but their overconfidence was their weakness. They still thought the attack on the dreadnoughts had been a fluke, that humanity had no real capability to fight back. They didn't know what humanity was capable of when pushed into a corner. He turned to face Kell and the others gathered in the room. "They're wrong," he said, his voice low but firm. "We can beat them, but we need to get them off balance, to show them that we can reach them, that we can hit back hard. We've been too reactive so far. Now it's time to go on the offensive." The room fell silent, the gravity of his words settling over them. Vosk had always been a strategist, always calculating and cold in his assessments, but the stakes had never been higher. Humanity's survival depended on this next move. If they didn't act now, if they didn't hit the Vathari hard enough to cripple them, they would be wiped out. "The Vathari are still arrogant. They think they've won. We're going to show them how wrong they are." Vosk continued, pacing now, the weight of the plan slowly taking form in his mind. "We need to take the fight to them, strike at their heart, make them think we're stronger than we actually are. And to do that, we need to hit them where it hurts the most. Supply lines, leadership, morale." Kell and the others exchanged glances, sensing the shift in Vosk's demeanor. They had heard the rumors, but now it was clear. Vosk had a plan. "We have one shot at this," Vosk said, his eyes scanning the maps on the holographic display. "Operation Sundial. We're going to trigger a solar flare to mask our true assault, and we're going to use Mercury's solar forge to launch our Starbreakers during the flare's electromagnetic storm. It's risky, but it's the only way we can get close enough to take down their fleet." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. The solar forge on Mercury was an old, abandoned station humanity had barely used, hidden in the planet's orbit. It was a perfect place to stage an ambush. However, triggering a solar flare using nuclear detonations would be a huge gamble. There was no way to be certain the flare would not affect Earth's atmosphere or cause damage to inhabited zones. "Wait," Kell interrupted, his brow furrowing. "You're saying we're going to detonate nukes in the chromosphere of the sun? That's—" "I know," Vosk interrupted, meeting his eyes. "It's dangerous, but the flare will be focused on the outer system. It will miss Earth and the colonies. We'll use the flare's electromagnetic disruption to hide the Starbreakers. We'll strike before they can adapt." Kell hesitated, the gravity of the situation sinking in. What if it doesn't work? What if the flare affects Earth? "It will not. We've calculated it. The flare's path will miss the populated zones, and the Dominion will not expect us to use the sun itself as our weapon. They'll think it's a natural event, and they won't know we're preparing to attack until it's too late." Kell's expression softened, though the concern was still evident in his eyes. "And if it does work, what then?" "Then we hit them hard. The Starbreakers will launch from Mercury and strike the Vathari's fleet. The EMP disruption will be our chance to cripple their ships before they can even react." The room fell silent again, as the weight of the plan settled on everyone's shoulders. Vosk's confidence had a way of spreading to those around him, and for the first time in a long while, Kell felt a spark of hope. It was dangerous, it was risky, but it was their best shot. The Martians, Kell said, looking around. "They're not going to like this. They won't agree to the collateral risk of detonating nukes so close to the sun." Vosk nodded, his expression hardening. "I know. That's why we need to convince them. I'll speak with them personally. They have to understand the stakes. We don't have the luxury of diplomacy now. We're running out of time." As Vosk looked at his team, he could see the hesitation in their eyes, but he knew they would follow him. This was humanity's chance to show the Veithari that they were not the underdogs anymore, that they were a force to be reckoned with. They would either succeed or die trying. But Vosk was no stranger to risk, and this was a fight humanity couldn't afford to lose. "We don't get to be passive anymore," Vosk said, his voice low but resolute. "We hit them hard, we hit them now, and we make them regret ever thinking Earth was weak." The room went quiet as the team absorbed his words, each one realizing the magnitude of what they were about to do. The countdown had begun, and there was no turning back. The Dominion's arrogance would be their undoing. Vosk had seen the weakness, and now humanity was going to exploit it. The galaxy would never forget the day humanity stopped running and started fighting back. "Get ready," Vosk said as he turned toward the command center's door. "Operation Sundial is about to begin." And with that, the team set into motion what would become humanity's defining moment in the war. The vast emptiness of space trembled as the countdown to Operation Sundial reached its final seconds. On the edge of the solar system, Mercury's solar forge hummed with activity, the launch sites ready. The plan was set, the pieces in place. The entire fate of Earth's colonies rested on the success of this mission, but no one could have predicted just how intense the coming hours would be. Vosk stood at the command console of the stealth ship Wraith, his eyes locked onto the screen displaying the projected path of the solar flare. The electromagnetic storm was only moments away from reaching its peak intensity, and the Starbreakers, armed with their new, devastating warheads, were ready to launch. The fleet that had come to Earth's doorstep was massive. 6 Dreadnought-class warships brimming with firepower, accompanied by a contingent of smaller warships and support vessels. The Veithari Dominion, with their arrogance and superior firepower, had underestimated humanity's resolve and ingenuity. "Initiating solar flare detonation," Kell's voice rang out, breaking Vosk's trance. The technician's fingers flew over the control panel as the nuke devices in the sun's chromosphere detonated in unison, sending shockwaves through the solar system. The flare began to pulse outward, masking all signals within its reach, an artificial shield that blocked all but the most precise sensor readings. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, no immediate reaction from the Veithari, no sign of their fleet's movements. And then, without warning, the first of the Starbreakers launched, their plasma-tipped missiles streaking through space, their paths hidden beneath the solar flare's veil. The electromagnetic interference created by the flare made it nearly impossible for the Veithari to detect the incoming projectiles in time. As the first dreadnoughts, looming giants of war, began to power down their shields to commence mining operations, Vosk's team watched in grim satisfaction. The torpedoes struck their targets with terrifying precision, disintegrating the shields and overwhelming the dreadnought's structural integrity. 6 of the massive warships exploded in a hail of plasma and debris, leaving only their twisted remains floating in the wake of the devastation. But the 7th dreadnought, the Vanguard, did not fall. It had learned from the others' mistakes. Its shields remained at full strength, and its energy beams stayed dormant, conserving power and preventing them from being exploited. Vosk cursed under his breath, recognizing that the Veithari were adapting faster than he had anticipated. This wasn't a fluke. The Dominion was learning from every attack, becoming more resilient with each strike. "Veithari are adapting," Vosk muttered. "They've learned from the others. We need to take this fight to them now." Kell, observing the Vanguard on his own screen, nodded. "We can't let them get away. The Vanguard is the key. If we take it out, the rest of their fleet will crumble." Vosk's mind was already racing through possibilities. The Vanguard was still dangerously close to them, and the electromagnetic storm had created a perfect opportunity. He glanced toward the cargo hold, where a salvaged shield emitter, the last piece of technology they had stolen from the first failed mission, was being prepped for its final purpose. It was a long shot, a risky play, but it was their only option now. Prepare the emitter. We're going to overload their comms. The plan was simple. They would use the emitter to trigger an overload in the Vanguard's communication systems, forcing a massive failure in its navigation and targeting arrays. Without those vital systems, the Vanguard would become a sitting target, unable to retaliate or coordinate with the rest of the fleet. The team rushed to position the shield emitter, a bulky device with a single, crucial purpose. As the Vanguard loomed closer, Vosk's pulse quickened. This was it. He had a plan, but that didn't mean it would work. It had to work. "Comms overloaded," Kell said, his voice tense. "Initiating feedback pulse now." The shield emitter roared to life, and a pulse of electromagnetic energy shot toward the Vanguard. For a moment, there was nothing. No explosion, no burst of light. Then, with a deafening crackle, the Vanguard's systems began to fail. Its communication array went offline first, followed by its targeting systems. The massive warship, once an unstoppable juggernaut, now careened through space like a lost ship in a storm. Vosk didn't waste any time. "Now! Hit them while they're disoriented." The Wraith surged forward, its engines roaring as it closed the distance between them and the Vanguard. The plan had worked. The Vanguard was helpless, its defenses shattered. But there was still one thing left to do. As the two ships collided in a fiery explosion of energy and debris, Vosk felt a rush of relief. The Vanguard was no longer a threat. It had crashed into one of its own ships, its hull buckling and breaking apart. The Dominion flagship, the heart of their fleet, was no more. But Vosk's moment of victory was short-lived. "We've done it," Kell said, his voice filled with disbelief. "We've really done it." But Vosk wasn't celebrating. His mind was already working, already calculating what would happen next. They had crippled the Vanguard, but the Dominion was far from defeated. Their warships were still out there, and they had only one option left: break their will. "Get ready for the counterattack," Vosk said, his tone grim. "We've won the battle, but the war is far from over." As the debris from the Vanguard scattered through space, the rest of the Dominion fleet began to scatter in disarray. For the first time, they were on the back foot. Vosk's team had given them a taste of what it meant to face humanity in full force. The galaxy had just witnessed the unthinkable. Vosk turned to the screen, watching the shattered remains of the Dominion flagship. He couldn't help but let out a small sigh of relief. The debris from the Vanguard floated in the cold vacuum of space, a testament to the intense battle that had just unfolded. The once proud flagship of the Vaethari Dominion, now nothing more than a twisted hulk of metal, spun slowly in the void. The Dominion's remaining ships, though formidable, had suffered significant damage. Their morale was shattered, their command structure disrupted. In the wake of this devastation, the remaining fleet units hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. Vosk knew it was only a matter of time before they would retreat. The remaining Dominion ships, their tactics broken and disarrayed, began to withdraw from the battlefield. The sight of their fleet scattering in the face of humanity's unexpected strike was a victory in itself, one that would reverberate throughout the galaxy. But Vosk knew this was far from the end. The Dominion was not one to accept defeat easily, and they would regroup. They would adapt, and when they did, they would come back stronger. But for now, humanity had won a crucial battle. As the retreating Dominion ships slipped into the distance, Vosk couldn't help but allow himself a brief moment of relief. He glanced over at Kell, who was staring at the flickering screens, his eyes narrowed in thought. "We did it," Kell muttered, as if trying to convince himself. "We did," Vosk replied, though his voice lacked the satisfaction most would expect after such a victory. The war was far from over, and they both knew it. The Dominion might have retreated, but they were not broken. The real challenge was still to come. Back on Earth, the aftermath of the battle was already beginning to take shape. The initial euphoria of victory was tempered by the reality that the fight was far from over. The governments of Earth, long divided over their own internal struggles, came together in an uneasy show of unity. Publicly, they celebrated their success, portraying a united front to the galaxy. But Vosk, who had seen firsthand the fractures in their system, knew the truth. The peace they had temporarily forged was fragile. There were already whispers in the halls of power. Whispers about control of the Starbreaker technology, about who would control the next steps in humanity's rise to power. Vosk didn't trust the political leaders on Earth. They were too eager to claim the victory as their own, to control the Starbreaker technology and the power it represented. Vosk had seen too much corruption in the ranks, too much ambition to believe that humanity's leaders would keep their word about peace. They would fight amongst themselves just as they had before, driven by greed and the desire for control. The real battle, he knew, was yet to come. It wouldn't be fought in space, but within the halls of Earth's political institutions. In the quiet of his command room aboard the Wraith, Vosk was left with his thoughts. His fingers drummed softly on the armrest of his chair as he considered their next moves. The war had given humanity a momentary advantage, but the galaxy was a volatile place. The Dominion, humiliated though they were, would regroup. They would rebuild. And the next time, they might not be so easy to defeat. And the next time, they might not be so easy to defeat. His thoughts were interrupted by a low beep, the signal of an incoming transmission. It was a data package marked with an encrypted seal. Vosk's brow furrowed as he activated the file. The screen before him flickered to life, revealing a recording from a dying Vathari officer's neural implant. The officer had been one of the Dominion's commanders, his last moments captured in the footage. The video was shaky, a product of the officer's failing neural systems, but the images were clear enough. The officer's final moments were filled with frantic commands as the vanguard disintegrated around him. The footage, however, wasn't just a record of a soldier's death. It held something far more valuable: the source of the drone transmission. The Dominion's war tactics, their reliance on automated drones and command protocols, had been crucial to their initial success. But this footage revealed something troubling. The drones were being controlled from a central nexus, a command structure that had been hidden from view, masked by the Dominion's advanced technology. If humanity could seize control of that nexus, if they could hack into the Dominion's drone network, they could cripple their enemies once and for all. Vosk leaned forward in his chair, studying the data carefully. The implications of this discovery were enormous. The Dominion had relied on their technological superiority to keep their enemies at bay, but this footage revealed their vulnerability. Their strength was built on a fragile foundation, and Vosk had just uncovered the crack in that foundation. But as he continued to examine the footage, Vosk's fingers hovered over the controls. This discovery was valuable, but it wasn't the whole story. The officer's final transmission had revealed something else, something even more troubling. The Vathari leadership had known about this flaw. They had known about the vulnerability in their network and had kept it hidden. This was no accident. It was deliberate, and that meant the war with the Dominion was far from over. Vosk deleted the footage, a heavy sense of responsibility settling in his chest. He didn't need this information anymore. It wasn't the time to expose the Dominion's secrets. The galaxy was already reeling from the destruction of the Vanguard, and revealing their vulnerabilities now would only provoke further retaliation. The Dominion would regroup, adapt, and come back stronger than ever. It was only a matter of time before they learned from their mistakes. "Next time," Vosk muttered under his breath, "they'll bring bigger guns." He stared at the blank screen, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The Dominion would return, and humanity would have to be ready. As the screen before him went dark, Vosk turned to the window, watching the stars twinkle in the distance. Humanity had survived the first wave, but the future was uncertain. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and Earth had just made its first move on the galactic chessboard. The next steps would be crucial. Humanity had proven itself capable of striking back, but would they be ready for what came next? Only time would tell. The silence after the battle was deafening. The vastness of space seemed to close in on Earth, as if the stars themselves were holding their breath. The remnants of the Dominion fleet, once a mighty force, now lay scattered across the void, their disarray a testament to humanity's resilience. But the cost had been high. The loss of life, the damaged fleets, the shattered colonies, they were all wounds that would take time to heal. Yet, amid the wreckage, humanity stood poised to rebuild, stronger than ever before. On Earth, the initial rush of victory had given way to a more sobering reality. The Dominion was not vanquished, it was merely beaten back. Their retreat was temporary, a tactical withdrawal that gave them time to regroup. As the political leaders huddled together, claiming the victory for themselves, there was an unspoken understanding. Earth had taken its first step on the galactic stage, but it was far from ready to hold its ground. Admiral Jareth Vosk, once a disgraced officer, had risen from the ashes of defeat and became the figurehead of humanity's military resurgence. His role in the victory at the vanguard was undeniable, but the war wasn't over. His tactical brilliance had won them the battle, but his leadership would now be tested in the long game. As Earth began its recovery, Vosk found himself at the heart of the rebuilding efforts, overseeing the reconstruction of Earth's defenses and the integration of salvaged Vathari technology into their new systems. Vathari were known for their advanced military technology, and now that technology was in humanity's hands. The warships, the quantum shields, the advanced energy weapons, all of it was now up for grabs, but it came at a cost. The technology was complex, and humanity had not been prepared to assimilate such cutting-edge hardware. Engineers worked tirelessly, reverse engineering Vathari designs and adapting them to human systems. The learning curve was steep, but Earth had one advantage: time. While the Dominion licked its wounds and plotted its next move, humanity was quietly strengthening its position, preparing for the inevitable return of their adversary. Vosk's days were filled with meetings, strategizing with military leaders and overseeing the work of scientists and engineers. The Martian resistance, once a collection of disparate, disorganized groups, had now become one of Earth's most valuable allies. Martian engineers, many of whom had been forced into the shadows under the Dominion's rule, now found themselves working side by side with Earth's finest. The partnership between Earth and Mars was born out of necessity, but it grew into something more: a political and military alliance that would change the balance of power in the galaxy. Mars was key to the rebuilding efforts. Not only was the planet rich in resources, but it also offered a strategic location for military operations. The Martian underground, once the domain of rebellious factions and anti-Dominion insurgents, became the birthplace of new military bases, where Earth's most advanced technologies were developed. In return for their cooperation, Earth offered protection, ensuring that the Martian colonies would never again fall prey to the Dominion or any other power seeking to exploit their vulnerabilities. But it wasn't just Mars that became a valuable ally. The Vathari defector network, though small at first, grew steadily as more and more former Dominion subjects sought sanctuary under Earth's banner. Some defectors came from former Vathari client races, while others were ex-soldiers who had grown disillusioned with their leaders' harsh tactics. Together they formed a coalition of sorts, an uneasy alliance of enemies turned friends, united by the shared goal of protecting their homes and securing their futures. Vosk had played a crucial role in forging these alliances, using his newfound status to broker deals and offer security to those who had nowhere else to turn. In exchange for the support of the Martian resistance and the Vathari defectors, Earth offered military assistance and access to the new technology they had seized from the Dominion. The Silent Armada, once a scrappy collection of retrofitted ships, was now being upgraded with advanced Vathari components, making it one of the most formidable fleets in the galaxy. The new warships, cloaked in the advanced stealth tech salvaged from the Dominion's own arsenal, allowed Earth to maintain a presence in the galaxy without resorting to brute force. Earth's military was no longer focused solely on defense. It was preparing to take the fight to any power that threatened peace. With the military rebuilding and new alliances forming, Earth also began to rebuild its diplomatic ties with the larger galactic community. The Federation, once hesitant to accept humanity's role in galactic affairs, began to take Earth seriously. The galaxy had watched in awe as humanity had faced down the Dominion and won. For the first time, Earth was no longer seen as a fringe player in galactic politics. It was emerging as a force to be reckoned with. But not everyone was thrilled by Earth's rise. There were whispers in the darker corners of the galaxy from those who still viewed humanity as a minor, unproven species. The political establishment on Earth, though unified in its military goals, was far from a monolith. As Earth's influence grew, so did the internal political tensions. Old factions who had been against the war and the alliances with the Martian resistance now found themselves at odds with the new power structure. Some feared that the increasing militarization of Earth was the first step toward tyranny. Others, like Vosk, were more pragmatic. The galaxy was changing, and Earth had to adapt or risk being crushed beneath the weight of its own inaction. Despite the internal strife, Vosk's role in these diplomatic and military efforts remained crucial. His presence as the face of humanity's military resurgence made him both a symbol of hope and a target for those who feared the shift in power. But Vosk wasn't concerned with political infighting. He was focused on one thing: ensuring that Earth was prepared for whatever the future held. He knew the Dominion wouldn't be content to let their loss go unpunished. Earth's role in galactic security was only beginning, and the challenges were just starting. The Starbreaker technology, humanity's most potent weapon, was now at the forefront of Earth's defense strategies. The technology that had once been a secret project was now the key to humanity's survival in a galaxy that had been so quick to dismiss them. But it was clear to Vosk that Earth's true strength wasn't just in its military might or advanced technology. It was in its ability to adapt, to learn from its mistakes, and to build alliances with those who had once been enemies. As the Silent Armada continued to grow in strength and influence, Vosk stood at the helm, watching the stars. Humanity had come a long way from its days of being underestimated and ignored. Earth had proven that it could not only survive but thrive in a galaxy that had once viewed it as insignificant. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Earth would not be left behind again. The galaxy had seen what humanity could do when pushed to the brink, and they would remember. Vosk, still recovering from the trials of the war, couldn't help but feel a deep sense of resolve. The battle wasn't over, but humanity had proven its place in the stars, and no matter what came next, Earth would stand tall, ready to face any challenge the galaxy threw its way. The galaxy had changed irrevocably in the wake of Earth's bold strike against the Dominion. Humanity, once thought to be a mere blip on the galactic radar, had become an unexpected powerhouse. The Silent Armada, a ragtag fleet assembled from retrofitted civilian ships and salvaged Dominion tech, now stood as one of the most feared military forces in the galaxy. But with power came tension, and Earth's rise to dominance was not without its complications. The Zerathi, once staunch allies of the Vathari, had long been known for their warrior culture and brutal tactics. They had fought alongside the Dominion for centuries, helping to subjugate countless systems and species. But now, with the Vathari on the retreat and their once unshakable control over the galaxy beginning to crumble, the Zerathi found themselves questioning their allegiances. The memory of their own suffering under the Dominion's rule had never truly faded, and as the Vathari's grip weakened, many Zerathi began to see Earth as a potential new ally, one that could offer them a more stable future. The first Zerathi defector arrived at Earth's doorsteps with little fanfare, a simple message carried by a lone shuttle. The defector, a former Vathari officer who had grown disillusioned with the Dominion's tactics, offered his services to Earth in exchange for protection. He spoke of the horrors the Dominion had inflicted upon his people and of the growing unrest within Zarathi ranks. It wasn't long before others followed, and the trickle of defectors soon became a flood. Commander Jareth Vosk, now overseeing Earth's military operations, understood the strategic value of these defectors. Zarathi warriors, trained in combat for generations, could be a powerful asset to Earth's growing forces. The silent armada, already formidable in its own right, was quickly bolstered by the addition of seasoned Zarathi fighters. These new allies were eager for a fresh start, eager to put their skills to use in a cause they now believed in. The Zarathi defectors brought with them valuable military expertise, knowledge of Dominion tactics, and intelligence that helped Earth refine its strategies. They also offered a direct connection to former Dominion-held territories, which could be used to secure trade routes, form new alliances, and disrupt any remaining Dominion influence. The political significance of this was not lost on Earth's leaders. For the first time in centuries, humanity was not simply a colony, it was a force capable of shaping the galaxy's future. Earth, with its newfound strength and strategic alliances, began to broker new trade agreements with former enemies and rivals. The Dominion's collapse had left a power vacuum, and many factions now turned to Earth as the rising star in galactic politics. Former Vathari colonies, once crushed under the weight of the Dominion's rule, now sought Earth's protection and offered resources in exchange for military support. It was a delicate balance, as some factions feared Earth's growing influence and the potential for another empire to rise. But Earth was determined to avoid the mistakes of the past. The silent armada was a symbol of strength, yes, but also of peace. Earth's role in the galaxy was not to dominate, but to maintain balance and ensure security. But as Earth's influence grew, so did resistance. Many of the galaxy's old powers, particularly those that had once thrived under the Vathari, now questioned humanity's intentions. They saw the Silent Armada as a force that could be used to enforce peace, but they also feared it could be used to impose Earth's will. Some of these factions, including remnants of the Vathari and their allies, began to rally against Earth's rise. Tensions escalated as some factions feared the loss of their own power, while others saw Earth's successes as a challenge to their dominance. The political landscape grew increasingly volatile. While Earth's alliances with the Zarathi and other defectors were solidified, there remained a growing distrust among some factions that felt threatened by humanity's rapid ascent. The galactic balance of power was shifting, and not everyone was willing to accept Earth's role in it. As negotiations over trade and security grew more complex, Earth's leadership faced a growing challenge: how to navigate this new political terrain without provoking conflict with the galaxy's established powers. Vosk, always a man of action rather than politics, found himself caught between these growing tensions. His leadership of the Silent Armada was unquestioned. His military successes had made him a hero among Earth's citizens and a symbol of humanity's strength. But he was also a symbol of something else: the unpredictable nature of humanity's rise. The Zarathi defectors, who had once been enemies, now fought alongside humanity. But their loyalty was fragile. They had seen what the Dominion could do, and they had seen how quickly Earth had mobilized against a threat. But in the back of Vosk's mind, he knew that the true test was yet to come. The galaxy was still full of old enemies, and Earth's newfound power was bound to provoke more than just political infighting. Vosk spent most of his time strategizing, preparing for the inevitable clashes that would arise as Earth's influence expanded. The Silent Armada had proven its worth in battle, but now it was a symbol of something greater. The idea that humanity, once seen as weak and insignificant, could stand on equal footing with the galaxy's most powerful species. This message resonated throughout the galaxy as the Silent Armada became the backbone of Earth's foreign policy. No longer was Earth a passive participant in galactic affairs, it was now a player, a force to be reckoned with. But despite these successes, Vosk knew that the real challenge lay ahead. The galaxy had never been kind to upstarts, and the power structures that had long existed were not going to accept humanity's rise without resistance. Earth's influence was growing, but the political landscape was still fragile. Trust was hard to come by, and alliances, though strong, were still tested by the realities of galactic politics. As Earth worked to consolidate its power, Vosk understood that every victory came with a price. The Zarathi defectors had been a boon to Earth's military, but their loyalty was something that could not be taken for granted. The Silent Armada had proven itself in battle, but the real test would be whether Earth could maintain its newfound influence without overstepping its bounds. Vosk knew that the key to Earth's survival in this new galaxy lay in diplomacy, in the ability to navigate these complex relationships without tipping the balance too far. But he also knew that sometimes strength was the only language the galaxy understood, and Earth had proven that it could speak that language. As Vosk gazed out over the fleet's command center, watching as ships in the Silent Armada prepared for their next mission, he couldn't help but wonder what the future held. The galaxy was changing, and Earth had a place at the table. But as always, there were no guarantees. Earth had risen from the ashes of the Dominion's oppression, and now it had to find a way to carve out its own future without repeating the mistakes of the past. The road ahead would be long, and the challenges would be many. But Earth was no longer an underdog. It was a force to be reckoned with, and for the first time in history, the galaxy knew it. The remnants of the Dominion drifted through the galaxy, disorganized and fragmented. Once a mighty empire that had held sway over vast swathes of space, they now found themselves scattered, unable to regroup or regain their former power. The final blow had been dealt, not by brute force alone, but by a series of tactical decisions, some daring and others born from desperation. The collapse had been swift, and the consequences reverberated throughout the galaxy. Earth, once seen as an insignificant player on the galactic stage, had transformed into something much more. The Silent Armada, humanity's ragtag fleet, had proven itself in the fires of battle, and its presence was now felt across the stars. As the Dominion's control crumbled, Earth solidified its role as a galactic peacekeeper. It wasn't through domination or conquest that humanity had risen, but through strategic brilliance, resourcefulness, and the sheer will to survive. Admiral Jareth Vosk, the man who had orchestrated humanity's rise, now stood at the center of this new order. His leadership and decisions had turned the tide of the war, his every move scrutinized by those who had once dismissed humanity as weak. His tactics, sometimes unconventional, often daring, became the benchmark for future military strategy. He had risen from the depths of disgrace, from a demoted officer to the hero who had turned the tide of galactic history. Vosk's name was etched into the annals of history, his legacy forever tied to humanity's emergence as a force to be reckoned with. But as humanity began to solidify its place in the stars, Vosk knew the battle for the future was far from over. The galaxy, while now more stable, was not without its complexities. The power vacuum left by the Dominion's collapse had shifted the balance of power, and though Earth had emerged victorious, new challenges lay ahead. With the remnants of the Dominion scattered, some factions attempted to assert their own dominance, while others, fearing humanity's growing power, whispered of rebellion. Yet Earth remained resolute, its strength now undeniable. The Silent Armada, once a ragtag fleet of retrofitted ships and salvaged tech, was now a symbol of Earth's might. No longer were humanity's forces seen as a disorganized bunch of underdogs. The galaxy now knew that Earth, with its innovative technology and tactical genius, could hold its own against even the most formidable of enemies. The Silent Armada stood as a testament to humanity's ability to rise from the ashes and carve out a place among the stars. Vosk, though honored, carried the weight of the victory with quiet reflection. He had always believed in humanity's potential, but the cost of the war weighed heavily on him. The scars, both physical and emotional, ran deep. His leadership, though respected, was a constant reminder of the sacrifices made, not just by him, but by every soldier, engineer, and civilian who had contributed to the war effort. His thoughts often drifted to those lost, and though the war was over, the price of victory lingered. Yet even with the weight of the past pressing down on him, Vosk knew that Earth's rise was just the beginning. The galaxy was a vast, unpredictable place, and while Earth had proven its strength, there was always the threat of new conflicts, new challenges. Humanity's place in the stars was now firmly established, but it was not guaranteed. Earth had to adapt, to continue evolving, or risk being swept away by the tides of galactic politics. The path ahead was uncertain, but humanity had shown that it could face any challenge, no matter how overwhelming. As Vosk watched the ships of the Silent Armada ready themselves for their next mission, he couldn't help but think of the future. There would be no complacency, no sitting idly by while the galaxy turned. The lessons learned from the war against the Dominion would serve as the foundation for Earth's future. Humanity's strength would no longer be questioned. They had earned their place, and they would fight to keep it. For Vosk, the war had not been about conquest or glory. It had been about survival, about securing a future for humanity in a galaxy that had once seemed so distant and indifferent. And now, as the galaxy's new peacekeepers, humanity would protect that future, not through brute force, but through a commitment to stability and peace. The galaxy knew that Earth was no longer the underdog. No longer were they a fractured, divided species clinging to life at the edge of the stars. Humanity had risen, and now their influence stretched far and wide. Earth was a dominant force that would shape the future of the galaxy. It was no longer a matter of survival, it was a matter of leadership. The galaxy had learned to respect Earth, to recognize the strength, ingenuity, and determination that had driven them to the top. Vosk stood at the center of it all, the man who had led humanity's rise, but even he knew that the true challenge had only just begun. The road ahead was long, and the galaxy was full of old enemies, new threats, and unexpected twists. But one thing was certain: Earth was no longer a mere footnote in the history of the stars. They were here to stay, and they would shape the galaxy on their own terms. And as Vosk watched the stars outside the command center, he muttered to himself, "We're just getting started." The legacy of humanity was now written into the stars, and nothing would stand in their way. What do you think of Earth's rise to power in the galaxy? Can humanity continue to dominate, or will new challenges emerge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more thrilling HFY stories, and stay tuned for more epic tales.